Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are. This is the Literary Hour once again. Today we do not have Professor Nangbe with us. Professor Nangbe is not feeling well, and we ask you to keep him in prayers. Today we're going to again talk about letters, letters that have shaped the nation, letters from Liberia to Liberia. And we're going to talk about some very important letters. Before we begin, I wanted to let you know that not I think the last week, the last Friday in May, we will have as our guest Bamba Sharif. You know, Bamba Sharif has been a prolific author, and he will be here to talk about his books. But we decided that he's written so many that we've chosen two. So the first one is Monrovia Rain. You can get that on Amazon. And if you remember, we said that we're going to have a more interactive discussion going on. So if you read the book, come prepared to discuss the book. The other book is Bound to Secrecy. So you can read this one and also have questions for him when he gets here. But the last Friday in this month, Bamba Sharif will be our guest. So I want to say that. So last week we're talking about letters. We're talking about letters that have shaped the nation, and we talked about people who had written letters to relatives in Liberia or in the United States, either telling them to come or telling them to stay away, either informing their masters that they've reached or informing their masters that they wanted to come to return to the United States. We saw a lady who said, well, I don't know a lot about Africa, but if I'm here and it doesn't work out, I can always go home. So she saw Africa as a place just to try. And then we saw a shift in the letters. We saw that as people started working in Liberia, the letters changed, the tones changed. It was no more, I want to go home. It was, well, we are here, we're making the best of it. Here are some of the challenges that we're facing. And then those letters were more historical, a chronology of the day, who gave birth, who died, things like that. And then, of course, it progressed until now. And we had said that it would be very interesting if we could have a collection of letters from refugee camps, writing to their relatives abroad or back in Liberia about what they were experiencing in these camps or in another country. So today we're going to talk about several letters. The first one is about Peyton Skipwith. If you remember, we said that Peyton was a freed slave who had come to Liberia, and Peyton kept in frequent contact with his master. Sorry, I use that word because that's what he says. And Peyton talks a lot about his challenges in Liberia. He was going blind, as you remember, and he was a bricklayer, and I think the dust hampered his eyes and his eyesight. So he wrote his master. He wrote his former master, John Hopewell Cock. And the reason why I'm going to read some of these letters, they are not to be displayed without permission. So I will read some of his letters. So he was enslaved in Virginia in 1800. But he was emancipated at the age of 33 by his owner, right? Who wanted the migration of free slaves to Liberia. So Skipwith got here. He wrote letters to his former owner, as I said, but the letters were destroyed. There were only 5 that survived. So these 5 are archived in the University of Virginia Library. So in the letter dated February 10th, 1834, Peyton Skipwith says, "Dear sir, I embrace this opportunity to inform you that we are all in moderate health at this time, hoping that these few lines may find you and yours enjoying good health." And he goes on to say, "I cannot tell you much about Liberia. I have not been from Monrovia yet, and it respects myself and wife were dissatisfied with the place. So he says there is some that have come to this place that have gotten rich, and those are well off. They have the natives as slaves, and poor people that come from America have no chance to make a living, for the natives do all the work. So from this, we see that Peyton Skipwith was not an educated man. He was not one of those who had been emancipated for a very long time and have taught themselves how to read or write. He was a laborer, as I said, a bricklayer. And he's saying that because some of the free slaves who had come, they had indigenous people to do their work. Skipwith couldn't find a job. So he and his wife, they left Monrovia. He says, so hard that we dare not be out unless exposing our health. There is no chance for farming in Monrovia, for it is a solid body of stones. But they say at Caldwell is a chance, right? So he's saying that nothing grows in Monrovia. That's what he's saying, that Monrovia is like a stone. But he says, but they're saying that if you go to Caldwell, it's a good place to grow food. So that's where he was. And then on March 6, 1835, which was about a year later, he says, Dear sir, I embrace this opportunity to write you these few lines to inform you that I am not well with a blindness of night so that I cannot see. All the information that I can get from the doctor is that I must stop laying stone. I have lost my wife. She died on July 2nd, 1834. The rest of my family are well. Sir, this is the third letter that I have written to you and have received no answer. I would be thankful if you would write by the first chance, right? And then he said, I want to come home, but I have a notion to go to Sierra Leone, as I'm advised by the doctors to quit laying stone, for it is injurious to my health. And then the third, I mean, one of the last letters was the one that he wrote in, which is quite long. So he wrote it in 1840, which was probably 4 years later or 3 years later. And he says he's not writing his former master anymore. He's writing another person, and he says, "I write you a few hasty lines by a vessel." Right? I think he's going to Sierra Leone now. And he says, since the authorities has thought it proper to declare their independence, I cannot with confidence say much about the present situation of the colony. It is not yet determined, right? And he goes on, he says, though our love for the society is great, we cannot return her that gratitude of thanks that we due her. You wish me to give you some information of the different productions. Now, this letter, when I read it, it was a letter that he was writing to someone who wanted to do business in Liberia. And so he's giving him quotes and things like that. And then he says, please remember my love to Master John Charles. You promised me in your letter that you were going to send my brother George to this place at the expiration of 3 years. And I will be happy to see him and all the people that you have promised to send on. So now what we're seeing is that Skipwith is writing to someone, but this person is really not a friend. I think it's another master. And he's saying, you said you are going to send my brother. I'm waiting for my brother. And if you can send the other people, that will be fine. So the letters, as I said, you see how the letters started from trepidation to this place, and now it has moved. So now I wanted to talk about a very interesting letter. Well, it's a series of letters. And I don't know if you've read the book, How Nations Die or How Nations Fail. But in that book, they talk about critical junctures, that there are a lot of countries or happenings within a country, and that defines the country. It becomes a critical juncture as to whether the country would go one way or the other. And at that juncture, the decisions that the country makes determines, has a lot to do with what happens in its future. So one of the letters that I stumbled upon that I would really like to read on this Unification Day would be a letter about the southeastern part of Liberia. So we will discuss that letter in a minute. We will talk about letters that Aberport wrote to Tubman. If you remember, we mentioned some last time, and some of you didn't catch on because we were talking about agriculture, because Elias Jones was talking about agriculture. So all the discussion went on agriculture, and we did not talk a lot about the letters. But I would like to talk about those letters because those letters are important. Now, and then we will talk a little bit about some of Tubman's letters. And I said that those letters show you, it shows you the imperial presidency, but it also shows you the high regard that people have of the presidency, um, and this notion that the president can solve all your problems. You can see most of them in these letters. You can see by the requests that they're asking the president for, that the president should grant almost everything to them. Okay, so the first letter that I want to talk about is one which is very, very interesting. So this letter is one that President Gardner is sending to Mr. Leopold Carens. Now, Mr. Leopold Carens was the Liberian consul in France. And Mr. Leopold Carens has struck up a friendship, let me put it that way, with President Gardner. So President Gardner writes Leopold because President Gardner has a problem. France seemingly is a friend to Liberia, but President Gardner sees that it's a struggling country, Liberia. It needs protection. They have asked the United States for protection, and the United States said, "Well, you've declared independence, so it's up to you to protect yourself." So they've been looking, and now he writes this letter. And please listen carefully. I want to read this letter, and then you will see how it goes. Okay, so he says, and this is President Gardner on October 7th, 1879. He says, "As a young nation struggling into existence, we need the aid and advice of older and stronger nations. While we have all the elements of a nation within us, we need means and facilities to develop the resources of our country. Our coast needs guarding against smugglers and violators of our revenue law, and we have no gunboats for the protection of our seacoast. Our coast to the south of Cape Palmas is open and free to foreign traders by calling in at Cape Palmas and taking on board an inspector of the customs. But we have no revenue cutter to enforce the law in this respect. And the foreign traders, knowing this, take every advantage of us by evading the law and trading them from the Cavala to San Pedro, say 105 miles, without paying the custom duties arising on said trade. I shall be pleased to learn at your earliest opportunity the success you have had in obtaining a small vessel from your government for us. Your last to the Honorable Secretary of State, Mr. Gibson, on this subject is most encouraging, and I hope nothing has transpired since to mar or break of the negotiations for said vessel. It will be a pleasure to see French merchants visiting our ports of trade. Once upon a time, the French did a considerable trade with us on the most agreeable terms and conditions." So Gardner is writing to Mr. Leopold Carens, and he's saying that we do need protection, and we're asking you for a gunboat so we can protect the southeastern part because they are foreign traders. If you remember last week, we talked about Mr. Lawrence. Elias Jones had mentioned Mr. Lawrence, and he said that Mr. Lawrence had gone to the people of the southeast region and he was trading with them. And he said to them, "The reason why I'm raising my prices is because the government of Liberia is forcing taxes on us. Now, if you will rise up and get rid of the government, and France and Britain will not interfere, then I will bring my prices down." If you remember that when Elias Jones was writing, he said this Lawrence man had a slave colony, and he was also inciting the indigenous people to revolt against the republic. Now we come here and we see that President Gardner is saying we need gunboats, we need things for us to protect our borders. And he's writing to the Council General of Liberia, to France, which is Mr. Carens. So this is the first letter he writes him. He's reminding him that we've had this discussion before. I need the gunboats to protect the border. So He writes again, and he says, and please listen carefully. He says, with regard to an application um, um, on the part of Liberia. Oh, okay. So this one is Mr. Karens now replying to to President Gardner, and I quote. He says, with regard to an application on the part of Liberia for the protection of France, I have honor to say that while appreciating very highly your efforts in this connection, as well as the kind feelings of certain political men in Paris, prompting them to aid us in securing so great a benefit, yet His Excellency the President does not feel at liberty to take this step without an expression from the national legislature to that effect. So Mr. Karras says, slow down. We cannot do anything right now. The president has to take it to the legislature. So then, um, it's on September 2nd, in 1879 again, Gardner writes Karens again. And Gardner says, your views of a French protectorate for Liberia are forcible and highly appreciated. And it is a source of great satisfaction to the government to know that you have been able to make a so favorable an impression on behalf of this nation as to lead you to conclude that an application on the part of this government for such an arrangement will be favorably received. So Gardner is writing Karens, and Gardner is saying, whoa, thank you so much he's Consul General. So thank you so much for talking to the French government. And I want you to let the French government know that if they were to give us protection, we will be very happy. It will be very well received. He goes on to say, and I quote, this matter is receiving increasing attention and consideration, especially in view of the fact that our government is now actively engaged in annexing large tracts of inland territory with the view of reaching as soon as possible the waters of the Niger, so as to turn the trade from the rich section of the country into Liberia. Active negotiations are now in progress, and we have now already annexed an extensive region of the country to the distance nearly 250 miles from the coast. This will add immensely to the value of our commerce and afford a rich market for the French and other foreign manufacturers. It is in the power of the French government to aid us in acquiring and controlling this rich interior country. Now, this is very interesting, right? Because first, you have Gardner saying, we welcome protection from the French. We need gunboats, yes, but we need French protection. Because remember, they had gone to America, to the United States, to ask for protection, and the American Colonization Society had said, but you have declared independence, you're an independent country, we cannot be the ones protecting you any longer. So Liberia turned to France. Now, Liberia is saying, Gardner is saying, and if you look at these letters, he says that we have already annexed an extensive region of the country, right? 250 miles from the coast. So here we have the map, and the map, as you can see, in the yellow, it's kind of early. I didn't want to show this right away, but you see the yellow is this is the territory that France took from Liberia. But this is further down on the conversation, Anthony. What we're saying now is that Liberia itself, the government of Liberia is saying that, oh, we've annexed a lot of the hinterland. So I'm not trying to judge. I'm not trying to play judge and jury. But if you see the word annexed, the word is not we bought. So did they buy the land? They said they annexed the territory. Who did they get it from? Were they giving approval of the people from the southeast to annex their land? We don't know. But Gardner is saying to the French, oh, we have annexed the land. He said nearly 250 miles from the coast. He says this will add immensely to the value of our commerce, and it will afford a rich market. Okay, we read that. And then he says, for which consideration special concessions should be made to her merchants and citizens that could prove profitable to France and beneficial to Liberia. Now, the part that is really interesting is that Gardner says to the Council General, he says, there is no doubt that Liberia, being composed of Africans, can, with a little aid from France, do more towards securing a permanent hold upon the interior trade of Western Africa than any foreign nation. What England, France, and Germany require expensive naval and military force to accomplish, we can effect by race sympathies and race interests. The Europeans cannot, right? So now Gardner is saying we are black, just like the people, the indigenous people. So we can play on sympathies and say, look, we are all one people. And he's saying that France, Germany, and England cannot do that, but we can do that as black people, and indigenous people are black people. We can secure a permanent hold, right, with a little aid from France. So don't forget, he's still asking, right? He's still asking about aid. So I would like to break, because I know it's very interesting. But for those of you who are just coming, we talked about how nations fail. I will come back to that book, because in the book it says that when Professor Nangbe and I, when we're discussing, we've said that history, people look at history for patterns, right? What happened to this country? What decisions did they make? What path did they take when they were confronted with various paths? Which one did they choose? And is the country better off for it, or is the country worse off? If the country is better off, this juncture, this critical juncture, now becomes a learning tool. So, excuse me, so that if the country is confronted with this again, they would say, you know what? I think that we should go with what happened 17 years ago. Now, the circumstances might be different, but if we look at some of the patterns, we can choose where to go. Now, we've come to Gardner asking the French for help. He wanted gunboats to secure the border. He wanted France's help in protecting Liberia. He also said that it would be very beneficial for France because the foreign merchants will be able to sell their merchandise. Now, we don't know what happened, right? We can say, obviously now that we're here in Liberia as an independent country, we know that France didn't take over Liberia. We know that. But what happened? So, listen to what happened. On January 15, 1883, right? So, Gardner has been writing since 1879 to the French, oh, we want your help. And Carens has been writing to say, look, we will give you help, right? We're going to give you protection, but we have to take it, the president has to take it to the parliament. So just wait, everything will be okay. But then in 1883, January 15, we get a letter from the Secretary of State, right? And it says, I have the honor as well as regret to inform you. So this person is writing to the Council General Carens. He says, I have the honor as well as regret to inform you that in the consequence, in the fit of illness with which His Excellency Anthony W. Gardner was seized some weeks ago, totally disabling him for official duties, he has this day resigned the position of President of the Republic of Liberia. The Honorable Vice President Alfred F. Russell would now assume the office of President to the close of the term. So now we see why we're in this waiting mode, trying to see if we're going to be protected by France. Gardner gets sick. And they write Carens and say, oh no, now we have a new president, Russell. Russell will take over from the term. So now, what do we see? This is the critical juncture, right? The critical juncture. Why? Because what's going to happen? Is the new president going to continue? Was he even aware of what Gardner was doing? Is he going to continue and say, okay, now there's no change, we're going to go forward, or is something going to happen? On December 20th, 1886, right? So that was okay. So that was a little ways. Secretary of State Edwin J. Barclay, he's writing to Leopold Carras. Leopold is still Consul General, and he says, and here is the part of the letter I like. And he says, and I quote, I have the honor to acknowledge the receipt of your dispatch of the 7th November last, informing me, among other things, of the particulars of the private audience that Mr. de Frisinet was pleased to accord to you on Liberian affairs, and enclosing copies of the letter which he addressed to you on the 5th of July last, and of the paper which is said to be a treaty concluded on the 4th of February 1898 between France and the chiefs of Bessiby for the recognition of French sovereignty over the portion of our republic, concerning which I need only repeat what you have observed in the above dispatch, that these territories have formed a portion of the Republic of Liberia long before the date of the so-called treaty. Therefore, they will remain part of the Republic. Critical juncture. President got ill, new president got there, Edwin J. Barclay was Secretary of State, and he said, no, not so fast. This is our land. We have not signed any agreement with you. In fact, we've signed agreement with the chiefs and not with you. And they were included in the dispatch that he sent. So he said, this is our land, it's part of our territory, and we're not going to give it to you. Critical juncture, right? They decided, no, this is not going to happen. But now, Anthony, we can show the map. But unfortunately, with everything that was said in 1911, France still took part of Liberian territory, right? See the yellow portion, Franco-Liberian boundary as per 1892 treaty, right? But there was no treaty because Edwin J. Barclay had said there is no treaty. This land belonged to us. But again, they took the land. So we cannot go back, of course, because the African Union said that all the old borders, they are there and everything. So we can't go back and renegotiate or take our land, or take them to court. We should though, but so this is what happened. He got the letter from Edwin J. Barclay, but they still annexed the portion of Liberia, the one that you see in yellow. Okay, so critical juncture. That's one of the letters that we wanted to talk about. The second letter that I wanted to talk about. Sorry, I keep saying we because I miss Prof. Nangbe. And what we've been saying all along is that the diaries, the journals, the letters, they are a rich source of history because, as Prof said, it's an unadulterated truth. It's not like somebody would lie. For what purpose? In a letter, or in a journal. It's not a history book that somebody published and you say, did this happen? These are letters and between the personal, you get these kernels of truth. So the second letter we want to discuss is the one. So Joseph Jenkins Roberts used to always write these long letters or go to the legislature and he would say something and then come and write them down again. So if you look at these ones, they are very interesting. And this is 18. He's writing to. He talks a lot about different things. So he says, and I quote, so my thing is, I keep saying that people say, oh yes, the United States is a great ally. But in some of these, when you read it, you start to think, So in this one, he says I quote, the Secretary of the Treasurer lost no time in remitting funds to meet the amount due to the United States government for accrued interest on purchase of arms and ammunition for the war in 1869. William Cowpinker, Esquire, Consul General of Liberia, to whom was remitted said funds, has advised the Secretary of the Treasury of the payment of 9,000 to 180 to $9,184.19 as the amount of 4 years interest. I beg to mention in this letter that the Secretary of State, by direction of the executive, has addressed a letter to the Secretary of State of the United States asking for reasons with aforesaid with further interest thereon by remitted, but as yet no reply has been received. So okay, so we know now that in 1869 there was a war, and we know from this letter that the American government sold ammunition to the Republic of Liberia. But then they put interest there, and the interest was very high. So we know now that the Secretary of State, William Carpenter, wrote the Secretary of State of the United States to say, but why? Why do we have to pay such huge interest? But as I say, no reply has been received. It will be interesting, and historians can do. It will be interesting to see if a reply was ever given for the interest. And then somehow, when you're reading the letters, they all mesh. And the reason I say that is that you will be reading a letter, and the letter will be written by somebody else to somebody, and then you read another letter, and they're saying almost the same thing. So it's very, very interesting about that. So before we continue the letter, Anthony, if we could see some comments, maybe people would like to join in the conversation, which would be great. Okay. What? Okay. Okay. So, oh, okay. So maybe we can continue with the letter from Joseph Jenkins Roberts. So, and he would write about things that are happening in the country. So the second portion of this letter is one that he wrote. So he's writing and he's giving accounts. And he said, Captain Benjamin J.K. Anderson, Chief Commissioner for Montserrado County, has informed the Secretary of State of the acquisition of a fine territory in the Pesci country, the chief and people incorporating themselves with the citizens of the Republic. Superintendent Roberts informed me that the commissioners of this county obtained a cession to government of the entire tract of land lying between Grand Bassa County and the Pesci country. So I don't know. Okay, so now when people were asking, I think last week we had a viewer who kept saying that the free people took the land. So we see in this letter that Joseph Jenkins Roberts is saying is that they took the entire tract of land lying between Grand Bassa County and the Pesci country. I don't know what the Pesci country is, but I mean, I'm sure somebody can explain. So that's another one. So then the interesting thing, and I think I'm going to delve deeper into this. I'm going to start reading more letters. Is that the cargo steamship? So there was a ship called a Yoruba, and the Yoruba was wrecked in Cape Palmas in 1873 along the coast, right? And Joseph Jenkins Roberts is saying that this has caused the government much perplexity and concern. He said, I propose to make a personal visit to Maryland to look into these matters, but in consequence of bad weather and severe ill health, I was obliged to return to Monrovia. I appoint and empower the Honorable H.W. Dennis, Secretary of the Treasury, to progress to Cape Palmas to adjust fully all accounts relating to the Yoruba cargo. So I want to know this Yoruba cargo. Is it free? I mean, is it slaves that were coming from Europe, Yoruba slaves, or what is this cargo? I will look into the other letters when I access and see. And then the third one that he wrote, he says the Secretary of the Treasury, while in Maryland, they are established at Berryby in that neighborhood on Liberian territory several foreign trading factories through which goods and merchandise are introduced into the country on which duties have not been paid in the country. Measures must be taken to put an end to this illicit trade. Now, the reason I'm saying that, and that was because if you remember when we talk about Peyton Skipwith, right, and we talk about Elias Jones, and Elias Jones said that he said this Englishman Lawrence was inciting the people in Cape Palmas or in the southeast to break away from Liberia because of what? Because the Liberian government was levying taxes, and he kept saying to them, "This is the reason why my products that I'm selling to you is very expensive. So please rise up," which they did, and they were defeated. Um, so we see that Elias Jones says that in his letters. He says that there was he called Mr. Lawrence, but he said there were a lot of British people who were inciting the people in the southeast to rise up, and that was because of the duties that were levied against their products by the Liberian government. And here we see Joseph J.D. Roberts saying the same thing. He's saying that these people are doing illicit trade. And then he says, and it's fitting today. I know that people can argue and say that there was no true unification, but when I was reading his letter, I highlighted this to read. And I quote, he says, "For the first time in the history of the Republic," and he's writing to some of the people in the legislature. He says, "For the first time in the history of the Republic, you have associated with you in your legislative deliberation native chiefs from several parts of the country. These chiefs have been selected for their intelligence and influence, and I doubt not they will be able by their counsel and advice to render important assistance in whatever measures you may deem it proper to absorb for the elevation and improvement of this people." So we see that in the legislature, they used to, they invited chiefs to come and sit and deliberate with the legislature. So I thought to highlight that because of Unification Day. Yes. So can we? Are there other comments? Anthony, do we have comments or no? Oh, so he said, "Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yes. Okay. So Larry Kennedy said, why did the ACS refuse to help Liberia?" In one of the letters, and I'm sorry, I can't post some of the letters because I've been reading all. It takes you. It is priceless to read these letters. But one of the things was that the ACS said that Liberia was now an independent country because if you remember, the ACS they were kind of hesitant about Liberia declaring its independence. But when Liberia declared its independence, they said that they will no longer help Liberia financially and in other ways. So I think they felt like because Liberia was an independent country now, that it should stand on its own. Yeah. Harrison Barjibo said, if President Gardner's letter was about our annexation of land, why then was our legitimacy over the yellow portion of land? No, Harrison, what happened was that President Gardner had taken land from the southeast already. He said 250 miles off course. He had taken the land. What he wanted was, you see the yellow portion, when President Gardner took, that was part of Liberia. But when President Russell wrote and said, "This is our land. We're not going to give it to you or anything," the French still went ahead and took that land. So the French, if you see it say French annexation of Liberian land, that's our land that was taken away by the French. Hinterland taken over by France. So it was not so we have jurisdiction over that land, but apparently because Liberia complained, but France said that they did not give sufficient evidence why France could not lay claim to this land. So that land was annexed to Guinea. Okay, so won't you agree that independent countries could still seek aid? I agree with you, but I also agree with Julius Nyerere when he says, "Who feeds you owns you." Right? So of course we can ask for aid. I guess to me it would be the degree of aid. If you are asking someone to help you set up, protect your border, I don't see anything wrong with it. If you are asking someone to help you feed your family or feed the country, I see that. If you have fertile soil, last week when Elias Jones was sent to Liberia, Elias Jones said that he had never seen soil as rich as the soil in Grand Bassa Cove, right? And he proceeded to name the things that were grown in Bassa: pomegranate, mangoes, soursop. He named wealth, coffee, cocoa. But he said that especially the people who had settled in Bassa Cove, like a lot of the free slaves from North Carolina, they did not want to grow rice or cotton because they felt that it was too reminiscent of what they had left behind. So they didn't want to do that. So I'm not saying that that countries cannot ask for aid. I mean, India is asking for aid now with the COVID. A lot of countries ask for aid. I'm saying the degree to which you can ask for aid is determines, I guess, the determines the standing of the country. If you have a pandemic and you're asking for medicine because you're overwhelmed, I would say that's a legitimate a request for aid. If you're asking for money, yeah, if you're asking for money to, I don't know, like President Tubman do a boat, no, that's not something. So if we don't have any questions now, we'll go now to what we kind of pushed aside last time, the Tuckman letters. We're not going to read a lot because there are a lot. But we're going to talk again about our favorite icon, Aberport, right? We talked about Aberport letters, and we said that Aberport, and I know this is a jump, but what we had said at the beginning, I said that we're going to talk about important letters, right? Letters that kind of like uh, highlighted a lot of things in the country. So we've talked about the annexation of land. We've talked about how if Gardner didn't get sick, you know, we definitely would have. I mean, it didn't matter really because all in all, they still annexed the land. They still took the land, but it is very empowering to see that our Secretary of State at the time, a small country, would stand against France and say, no, 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 this is our land. So even if the outcome turned out badly, it is still good to know that at that time there were people willing to stand up to France. Okay, so we come to Aberport. Last week we talked about how Aberport wrote President Tubman saying that you shouldn't be buying a yacht. Liberia is a poor country, and that it may be that in the future you might be able to afford a yacht, but now is not the time. And then we see that President Tubman wrote him and said, you have an evil. You are very aggressive. You are very acrimonious in your dealings, and you don't pay taxes. Remember, Tubman said to him, "You don't even pay taxes, and you want to talk. Since when was the last time you paid taxes?" So what I wanted to show was that there are people who can stand up, right? There are people who, at great personal sacrifice, they could stand up. If you remember, I said that they said Aberport used to go with toothbrush in his pocket, so because he knew that he could end up in jail any day. So we the letters that were very interesting was the one that the Secretary of Education. This is 1949 now. The Secretary of Education, which is Pearson, right? He sent Aberport a letter and told Aberport that the Aberport was terminated as a public school teacher, right? No reason was given for the dismissal. So Aberport appealed his decision, the decision, right, to terminate his position. And in 3 weeks, Pearson responded, right, Pearson say that, oh, I will do my best, but I quote, he said, I'm under no authority and I'm not at liberty to do more than I'm instructed to do, right? So Pearson was sympathetic to Appleport, but Pearson couldn't do anything. Again, we come to the imperial president. Everything revolved around President Tubman at the time, right? So in February, so this was January 1st, Appleport was terminated. So in February, Port received a letter from Pearson informing him that in keeping with the directive of His Excellency the President, I wish to advise you that you are restored to your position as principal of the government school in Crusoeville, effective February 1949, right? So it goes on, things are going fine. You know, Appleport is always uh, talking against the ills of society. And then July 2nd, 1955, you know, after he's been writing, he's summoned again to the Ministry of Education, and he says, kindly call the Department of Public Instruction on Wednesday, the 6th instant at 10 o'clock for a conference. So when Appleport goes to the Department of Instruction, the Secretary of Public Instruction at the time was Ernest Jerome Yancey, right? So he says to Port, and I quote, he says, having shown qualities of a man inherently an anarchist by exposing the administration of Mr. King, Mr. Barclay, and now President Tubman for organizing a committee to contribute to Mr. Tuanre, who viciously attacked the present administration and is attempting to prevent the registration of the poll of Crusoeville on election day from performing her duties because she was a school teacher. I have been directed to terminate your services as a public school teacher as of today's date because of hearing above outlined. So now, the second time, Appleport, his job's gone, right? So his job is gone. And then Appleport writes, Jerome Yancey, he says, I quote, he said, I want the opportunity to face the accusations and accusers in an impartial investigation, and also that you reconsider the directive given, right? But by that time, when he wrote that letter, Yancey couldn't do anything because Tubman was on his farm in Totota. He was on vacation in Totota, so he could not, right? But then Port was so persistent. He kept going to the Department of Public Instruction. So Tubman decided to write Port. And he says, and I quote, Mr. Port refuses to contribute 1 cent of his money that he is receiving from a weak administration to the success of the Whig Party. That's a true Whig Party. But he was willing to contribute to the support of the family of a man who, to all intents and purposes, has committed criminal libel against the administration and has been convicted by the legislature and imprisoned. Right? That's a Tuanre. So Tubman, then after he finished reprimanding, right, Appleport, he tells Yancey to give Appleport his job back, right? So Appleport goes back, December 8, 1955, he goes back, right? But Appleport is not one to just go back like that. He writes and he says, oh, you owe me back wages. All the time I was unemployed waiting for the president, you owe me those wages, right? So Yancey now gets very angry, and Yancey writes him, and in a letter he says, and I quote, he said that Mr. Port, he said, you were not in service at the time because you were dismissed, and therefore you have no claim to such wages, right? But Appleport kept insisting that he wanted his wages, right? Then now the Secretary of Education was Augustus F. King. So Appleport writes King, and he's like, I want my back wages, you know. And he says, and I quote, in view of the current speculation that members of the True Whig Party are to contribute to the party fund at the end of the month and that salaries are to be cut, I am earnestly requesting that you direct no such cut to be made from my salary check, right? He said, I'm not a member of the True Whig Party and should not therefore be forced to contribute to its funds. President Tubman, in his recent visits abroad, made it clear that unlike Ghana, ours is not a one-party state by law. While it is a fact that my salary was refunded to me in the past when I raised the question of non-membership, I feel it is humiliating, despotic, and tyrannical that such requests for a refund should have to be made amidst the circumstances in the first place. And of course, the government answered Secretary of Education, Augusta F. King, was tired, and he said, and I quote, that Mr. Port is hereby relieved of his duties as public school teacher of Montserrado County, effective today's date, for administrative reason. And that was that. And I brought that up because I wanted to show the courage of Albert Port. You know, the letters that went back and forth, that he was not taking things lying down. So I know that the show is only 1 hour, so we will look at some comments and maybe continue it another time. So if we have comments, we can. Based on the readings, it appears that ACS wanted a new nation to fail. Wouldn't you agree? I would think so, Larry. I mean, the thing is that if you remember, the objective of the ACS was not to bring a country thriving. They just wanted to get rid of the freed people, right? So and people forget that the ACS full name was the American Society for Colonizing the Free People of Color of the United States. That was the full name of the ACS, right? And its exclusive objective, and I will read, was, and I quote, to promote and execute a plan of colonizing with their consent the free people of color residing in our country in Africa, as such other places as Congress should deem most expedient. So it wasn't that whether they wanted it to fail or not. The thing was, all they wanted to do, they wanted them to leave. And there was a Archibald Alexander, who was a priest, and he was saying, if I were a colored man, I would not hesitate a moment to leave the country where Black people face prejudice and where Black skin was held in the lowest degree of degradation and no amount of good conduct can overcome. Yeah, he said, until human nature is radically changed, they would never attain or participate in the privileges of American freemen. So it wasn't that they were urging them on to say, oh, you know, that they were going to be that they were going to do great things in Liberia. Remember, they just wanted them to leave. Yeah, and yeah, it's true. The ACS, if you remember, in Peyton Skipwith's letter, he was talking to some of his to another one of the slaveholders, because this guy was thinking about starting a business in Liberia. So they did not. So they saw Liberia as a colony and also a place to make money. You can make money if you're in another country, and this is an independent country, so you can make money that way. Oh, Frank, and also an informative history of our country. Yeah, thanks, Frank. Um, so Harrison, okay. Oh, Bobby Brown, history has to be told. You know, every country. I mean, you can look at East Germany and West Germany. You can look at Russia, Lithuania. You can look at Israel. These historical events are not there to punish. They are there to teach us who we are, what we've overcome as a country. If you look at the story of Liberia as a tiny Black republic, it struggles. It shows us something to be so proud of, you know, that, and we always said last time, we said the commonality. People came from the Mali, Songhay empires, the people migrated to the coast. Then we had the free peoples coming, and we became one. You can argue all you want, but this is a country that we can be proud of. How can we not know our history? Achipe says, if you don't know where the rain started to beat you, you will never know where to dry your skin. It is essential. I mean, even as a person, you know your history, you know, and there are a lot of people who think history started after the war. And it is our duty to bring these things up. Why do you think they have all these old papers in the Smithsonian, the archive? Because they are important. Are you telling me that America will not look at, oh, look where we've come from? We've left England and we came and settled. Look at South Africa. These are the narratives of a country that strengthens the country. So it is not here to make people feel bad. It is here to say, I did not know that. Now I know that. You mean France almost took our country? You mean the people annexed huge portions? Yes, they did. You know, history is made up of the good and the bad. But what you've overcome strengthens you as a nation as well as a people. So this is not anything to throw aspirations or to make people feel bad. It is simply to say this is who we are as a people, and this is what we've overcome. So it's not my intent to make anybody feel bad. It's mind-boggling and ironic that the high level of interest exhibited in literacy through the exchange of letters by the forefathers makes me wonder, why did we drop the ball on literacy? And Anastasia is very thank you. It's very interesting because there's a letter there. Look, we could have letters for 10 years. There's a letter, and it says that Liberians used to write a lot. And this person is even saying that, oh, there are so many journals. There are so many diaries that came out of Liberia. And so the person is listing some of them and saying that, oh, there's a lot of things coming out. We joked last week when we talked about the fact that people were writing and saying that if you're coming to Liberia, you must bring good clothes because the Liberian people, they know how to dress. They know how to put on clothes and things like that. So we learned the history. We learned that people went to visit the Queen Victoria. We learned that the women had reading societies, literary circles that Edwin Blyden used to go to. We learned all these things from history. Liberia didn't just come out of a rock. Liberia came out of the hopes and dreams and disappointments and fears of a lot of people who have made Liberia what it is. And if we can draw strength from them, I'm sure we can forge ahead. And this Unification Day is just to say to us that look what we've come through, as a people. So if we hold on together, we can make it. Yeah. So again, I would like to say that the last Friday in this month, we will be having Vamba Sharif on, and Vamba will be discussing his book Morovia Reign. So it's right here. You can find it on Amazon. Vamba Sharif, and he's written a lot of books. There's another one, Bound to Secrecy. So feel free to come with questions. Feel free to come and meet the author, and let us make it more interactive. We said that, this is a literary hour. So if you want to read a book and you want to come for us to discuss it, feel free. If you want to suggest a book that we read, we try to bring Murder in the Cassava Patch, but unfortunately it's out of print. But if you have a copy and you want us to discuss it, and we have discussed it before, you can feel free to do that. Suggest a book, because we said CNN had something about a book club where people are reading a book in Nigeria and discussing it in Belgium, Germany. So let's form our own little literary society. Read books by Liberian authors, discuss, read poems, discuss. These things will build our nation as well. Politics is essential, but also literary art. Let me put it that way. Art also builds a nation. It creates a nation, So let's be happy today. Today's Unification Day. Let's hold each other up. Let's lift Liberia up. And as we always say, whether you agree with the history of Liberia or you don't, whether you came on a boat, whether you walked, whether you came by car, by airplane, we are all Liberians, so we are trying our best to uplift our country. So until next time, we say thank you. Keep Prof. Nangbe in your prayers, and I will go up with this song that we are all Liberians. Thank you very much. Have a safe.
We are Liberians. Liberia is our home. Liberian people. Liberia.